Discover how God can illuminate your life with lessons of wisdom, biblical revelations. Have you ever felt like you're fighting against something far greater than yourself, as if trapped in an endless storm? Perhaps your life feels like a puzzle with missing pieces, where the questions echo but answers never come. What if I told you that you could find light even in the deepest darkness? This isn't a cliché, it's reality. Because God has something extraordinary to reveal to you, something that can turn your life upside down while putting it exactly where it needs to be. Pause for a moment and imagine. What would you do if you discovered that everything you need to overcome your greatest fears, pains, and uncertainties is already within your reach? Biblical revelations are not just ancient stories or poetic words. They are powerful tools God uses to transform your life. Each teaching is like a ray of light piercing the darkness, showing you that there is a way, even when you feel completely lost. But here's a warning. This journey isn't for the weak or for those seeking easy answers. God isn't interested in comforting you. He wants to transform you. He wants to break the chains that bind you, lift you from stagnation, and take you to new heights. And that means confronting truths that may hurt but are absolutely necessary. Are you prepared to face what God wants to show you? Because one thing is certain. Once you see this light, you will never be the same. God's light requires you to face your darkness. How often do you pretend everything is fine, even though you carry a dark abyss within you? Facing the shadows of your soul is painful, but ignoring them is like living in a house on the verge of collapse. You know where the cracks are, yet you keep painting over the walls to hide them. How much longer will you ignore God's light knocking, asking to enter and illuminate the corners you'd rather keep hidden? It's time to stop running. What you're hiding won't disappear on its own. It's easy to believe that your flaws and sins aren't that significant. After all, everyone makes mistakes, right? But what if God is telling you now, I don't want what's easy, I want your total surrender? Facing your weaknesses is like looking in a mirror and seeing the raw, unfiltered truth. No makeup, no filters, no excuses. God doesn't want to superficially improve your life. He wants to uproot everything that keeps you in spiritual mediocrity. And yes, it hurts. Change hurts. But staying trapped in the same empty cycle hurts even more. Think about your deepest secrets, the ones you've never shared with anyone. Do you truly believe you can hide them from God? It's like trying to block the sun with your hand. Pointless. God already knows your shadows, but He won't forcibly remove them. He waits for you to have the courage to bring them into the light. The truth is, as long as you're hiding, you're living below what God has planned for you. And that, my friend, is a betrayal of the very purpose for which you were created. Let's be clear, facing the darkness isn't optional, it's essential. Have you ever ignored a problem until it exploded in your face? The soul works the same way. If you don't deal with what's broken inside you, it will destroy you from within. God doesn't call you to confront these shadows because He wants to punish you, but because He wants to set you free. Imagine someone locked in a cell, holding the key but refusing to use it. That's what happens when you choose to live in darkness. If you think you can face it all alone, I'm sorry to say, but you're mistaken. This battle cannot be won by human strength, but through surrender to divine power. Remember Peter? He began to sink when he tried to walk on water by his own strength, but was saved when he reached out to Jesus. That's the essence of transformation. Recognizing that you cannot conquer darkness on your own, but that God's light is sufficient to illuminate even the deepest abyss of your soul. Now, let's be honest. How much longer will you remain a prisoner of fear, guilt, or pride? These shadows are like chains binding you, but you hold the key. God has given you free will to choose between freedom and imprisonment. Perhaps it's time to stop rationalizing your choices and start taking action. Saying, "That's just how I am," isn't a justification, it's an excuse. And excuses have never changed lives. God's light isn't for the complacent, it's for the courageous. God's true light doesn't just expose your darkness, it confronts you with a choice. Either you change, or you keep living a lie. Let's be honest. Are you happy with the life you're living? Or are you filling the voids with distractions, hoping they'll disappear? The truth is, only God can fill what's broken inside you. But this requires you to face the discomfort of admitting that you need to change. If you're looking for a practical step, start today. Take a piece of paper and write down everything you've been hiding from God. It could be a sin you repeatedly commit in secret, a resentment you refuse to let go of, or a fear that paralyzes you. Then, read it aloud and surrender it to Him in prayer. Say, Lord, this is who I am, but I trust in what you can make of me. It's not easy, but it's liberating. And it's in that moment that the light begins to break through. Transformation is never clean or easy. It's like breaking a vase and reshaping it. You'll feel pain, and you'll want to give up, but it's through this process that God molds you into something greater. The darkness only holds power over you as long as you feed it. When you decide to stop running and surrender to the light, everything changes. The question is, are you willing to face this process, or will you keep running in circles? As you reflect on this, ask yourself, are you ready to discover that God's true wisdom never leaves you comfortable? It shakes you, pulls you out of your comfort zone, and transforms you from the inside out. Perhaps this is exactly what you need to hear right now. Wisdom is a word many like to praise, but few truly understand what it demands. Those who seek wisdom aren't looking for comfort but for transformation. Think about it. Every lesson God teaches us through Scripture isn't just a beautiful message to make us feel good but a direct challenge to the comfort zones we've built throughout our lives. Wisdom isn't about accumulating knowledge. It's about application. And applying what God teaches us means breaking structures, changing habits, and even questioning what we once believed to be unchangeable. This journey isn't easy, but it's essential. Consider Abraham, called by God to leave his homeland, his family, and everything he knew to follow an unknown destiny. That's the kind of wisdom that transforms. God didn't promise Abraham an easy journey, but He assured him that obedience would bring eternal rewards. In the same way, God isn't asking you to live an ordinary life but one guided by faith. And that means relinquishing control, letting go of predictability, and surrendering to a plan you can't fully see. The question is, are you willing to step out of your comfort zone to be transformed? Sometimes, we seek comfort in the very things that prevent us from growing. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to let go of certain habits or relationships? It's because they offer an illusion of security, even as they destroy you from within. God doesn't want you trapped in these snares. Wisdom means identifying what's holding you back and having the courage to walk away, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. What matters isn't the difficulty, it's the transformation that follows. And don't think of transformation as a passive process. Wisdom demands action. Picture yourself in a boat amidst a storm. You can sit still, hoping the boat doesn't capsize, or you can grab the oars and fight to cross the turbulent waters. God calls you to row. He won't leave you alone in the storm, but He also won't do everything for you. God's wisdom is an invitation to partnership. He guides, but you must act. Think about how you can apply this today. Is there something in your life that you know needs to change but have been avoiding because it's uncomfortable? Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you, ending a toxic relationship, or even changing your career path. These moments of decision are opportunities to demonstrate wisdom. God equips you for each one, but the first step will always be yours. Choosing to stay in comfort is rejecting the transformation He wants to bring into your life. There's also the fear of failure. How many times have you avoided acting because you feared failing? Wisdom doesn't mean you'll never make mistakes. It means you learn from every mistake and allow God to shape you through them. It's like refining gold. Intense heat is necessary to remove impurities. God allows you to go through difficult moments not to destroy you but to purify you. Each challenge is a chance to grow if you face it with courage. Wisdom is also about trust, trusting that God knows what's best, even when you can't understand the full plan. Imagine a child learning to ride a bicycle. The child may not understand why the parent insists they keep trying after each fall, but eventually, they realize that every attempt makes them stronger and more confident. That's how it is with God. He lets you fall, but He never leaves you alone. It's within this dynamic that true wisdom is cultivated. When you finally begin to live with wisdom, you'll notice that transformation isn't just internal but external as well. You become a living example of what it means to be guided by faith. Your choices start to impact those around you. It's like a stone dropped into a lake. The ripples reach places you never imagined. God doesn't just want to change your life. He wants to use your transformation to change the world around you. Now, consider what it means to live this way. Wisdom isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey. And this journey often leads to uncomfortable yet incredibly rewarding places. As you reflect on this, have you asked yourself what God might be trying to transform in you right now? Perhaps it's time to find out. Biblical revelations have the power to illuminate not only what is good in us but also the areas where we are most fragile. They act like a mirror reflecting the things we try to hide but that God desires to transform. Avoiding them is futile. Every passage, every verse carries truths that confront us directly. Have you ever stopped to think about how God's Word exposes what we often prefer to ignore? Maybe it's time to face these mirrors with courage. Consider Peter's story, for instance. He saw himself as loyal, strong, and unwavering. But a single moment of pressure led him to deny Jesus 3 times. This weakness wasn't revealed to humiliate him but to shape him. Peter had to confront his limitations to become the leader God had called him to be. And you are no different. What are you denying God? What part of your life have you not fully surrendered? Biblical revelations also remind us that weakness isn't something to fear but to acknowledge. After all, how can God strengthen what you refuse to admit is weak? It's like trying to repair a house without recognizing that the foundation is compromised. God's word is clear. My power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9. When you recognize your fragility, you make space for divine grace to work fully. So, here's the question. What are you hiding? It could be a sin you haven't been able to abandon, a resentment you hold in your heart, or even a fear you can't overcome. Biblical revelations are an invitation to bring these areas into the light. And it's not to condemn you but to set you free. God doesn't want you burdened by the weight of your weaknesses. He wants you to experience the transformative power of redemption. Transformation begins when you stop running and allow His truth to guide you. Are you ready to step into the light? If you think you're alone in this process, remember that all the great leaders in the Bible faced this kind of confrontation. David had to confront the weight of his sin with Bathsheba. Paul had to contend with a thorn in the flesh that kept him humble. Even Moses, who led Israel out of Egypt, had to face his own insecurities before accepting God's calling. These stories aren't in the Bible by accident. They're there to remind us that God uses our weaknesses as tools for His glory. You might be thinking, but I'm not like those people. My weaknesses are different, bigger, more shameful. That's precisely the kind of lie the enemy wants you to believe. God isn't intimidated by your weakness. He's moved by your willingness to surrender it to Him. Think about it. If He was able to transform Peter, David, and so many others, what's stopping Him from transforming you too? God's Word also challenges us not just to recognize our weaknesses but to act on them. Maybe today is the day you need to forgive someone or ask for forgiveness. Perhaps it's time to confess something that has weighed heavily on your conscience. These acts of vulnerability are like opening a window in a dark room. The light enters, and the darkness disappears. And it's in that moment that you realize revelation isn't something to fear but something to embrace. When you allow God's Word to reveal your weaknesses, something incredible happens. You become more human, more real, more dependent on Him. This process doesn't just transform you. It inspires those around you. Your struggles and victories become living testimonies of what God is capable of doing. And that's powerful. Because in the end, it's not just about you. It's about what God can do through you. As you reflect on all of this, think about what it truly means to trust God, even when everything seems to be falling apart. Perhaps the next step in your faith journey is to confront something you've been avoiding for a long time. And it's precisely there that true transformation begins. Trusting God is one of the hardest choices you can make because it often means facing what seems impossible. Think for a moment about Abraham, who was called to sacrifice his own son. What would you do if God asked for something like that? It defies all human logic. But trusting God isn't about understanding everything. It's about believing that He knows what's best, even when nothing makes sense. And it's in that leap of faith that true transformation happens. We often associate trusting God with waiting for easier times, but the truth is that faith often leads us into the unknown. Look at Moses and the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. Imagine standing before a vast sea, with an army behind you and no visible escape. Would you trust that God would make a way? That's the kind of trust He asks of us. And it's in those moments of uncertainty that God demonstrates His power. But first, you must take the step. Most of us avoid situations that seem insurmountable. We crave control, guarantees, clear plans. But trusting God means letting go of all of that. It's like walking in the dark with only a lamp to illuminate one step at a time. You don't see the final destination, but you keep going because you know who is guiding you. That act of faith is what separates those who live ordinary lives from those who experience the extraordinary. Trusting God also means accepting that the journey won't always be easy. Look at Joshua and the walls of Jericho. He was called to march around the city for 7 days, something that seemed ridiculous to anyone watching from the outside. But by obeying a plan he didn't fully understand, the walls fell. Sometimes God asks us to do things that seem irrational because he sees what we cannot. The question is, do you trust him enough to obey, even when it doesn't make sense? Think about your own life. Is there something you feel God is asking of you, but you've been resisting because it feels too risky? Maybe it's a professional decision, moving to a new city, or even forgiving someone who deeply hurt you. Trusting God means facing these moments with courage, knowing he has already prepared the way. And even if you can't see the next step, he is in control. But trusting isn't just about taking action. It's also about waiting. Waiting for God's timing can be even harder than facing challenges. Think of Noah, who spent years building an ark while being mocked by everyone around him. He didn't see rain for a long time, but he kept going because he trusted God's promise. Often, we are called to wait in faith, even when everything around us suggests we're wrong. And it's in that waiting that our faith is refined. Trusting God also teaches us how to deal with failure. Not every challenge ends the way we hope, but that doesn't mean God isn't working. Think of Paul, who prayed repeatedly for God to remove his thorn in the flesh. The answer was clear: "My grace is sufficient for you." God didn't promise to remove all difficulties, but to be with us through them. And it's in that place of dependence that we find true peace. Sometimes, trusting God means letting go of what you think you deserve. Can you imagine giving up something you deeply value because God has something greater in store? That kind of faith isn't easy, but it's rewarding. Consider Job, who lost everything yet remained faithful. His story teaches us that trusting God isn't about avoiding pain, but about finding meaning within it. Trusting God is also a declaration to the world. When you act in faith, even amidst chaos, you become a living testimony of God's power. Your courage inspires others to do the same. This is how God's kingdom grows, through people who choose to trust, even when everything seems to be against them. Your faith isn't just for you. It's meant to impact those around you. As you reflect on this, think about what it truly means to trust God. Perhaps he is calling you to something greater, something you can't yet fully understand. And it's in that calling that true transformation begins. True peace is not something you achieve through effort, but something you receive through surrender. Life often places us in situations beyond our control. Losses, frustrations, unexpected challenges. In these moments, it's natural to fight against the circumstances, searching for a solution to regain a sense of control. But it's precisely at this point that God calls us to something different. He invites us to stop striving and trust in him. Accepting what you cannot change isn't giving up, it's recognizing that God is in charge. Consider Jesus' example in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew what was ahead: betrayal, pain, and death. Yet in his prayer he said, "Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." This is the essence of true peace, surrendering control to God, even when the path ahead feels unbearable. Have you ever stopped to think about what your life would look like if you fully trusted God the way Jesus did? The problem is that we want to control everything: the future, the people around us, and even God's plans for our lives. But this desire for control is an illusion. The truth is, we were never in control to begin with. God has been in charge from the start, and the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we'll experience the peace that surpasses all understanding. This peace doesn't mean you'll never face hardships, but it means you'll have the confidence to navigate through them. Picture yourself in a boat in the middle of a storm. You can exhaust yourself trying to row against the waves, or you can trust that the boat was designed to float. That's how life is. You can wear yourself out trying to fix everything on your own, or you can trust that God has a greater plan, even when you can't see it. That's the difference between living in anxiety and living in peace. Which path will you choose? Accepting what you cannot control also means letting go of pride. It's admitting that you don't have all the answers and that not everything depends on you. And that is incredibly freeing. Think about how many sleepless nights you've spent worrying about things completely out of your reach. God doesn't want you to carry that burden. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That invitation is for you, today. You don't need to wait for major crises to learn to surrender. True peace is cultivated in the small moments of daily life. It's when you choose not to react in anger to an irritating situation. It's when you decide to trust God instead of worrying about what could go wrong at work or in your family. These small acts of trust accumulate, building a life marked by peace. But what about situations where pain is unavoidable? How can you find peace in the midst of grief, disappointment, or loss? The answer lies in knowing that God is with you in every moment. He never promised the journey would be easy, but He guaranteed He would never leave you. Think of Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers and later unjustly imprisoned in Egypt. He could have given up, but he chose to trust God. And that faith took him from being a slave to becoming a governor. Perhaps you're at a point in your life where everything feels out of place. You feel like you're rowing against the current, fighting something you cannot change. This is the moment to surrender. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Accepting what you cannot control means letting go of a burden you were never meant to carry. And it's in that place of surrender that you find true peace. When you finally experience this peace, something powerful happens. You realize you don't need answers to everything because God is enough. You stop fighting against the waves and start flowing with the divine plan. In this new way of living, you not only find peace for yourself but also inspire others to seek the same path. As you reflect on this, have you considered what God might be asking you to surrender today? Facing the lessons of wisdom that God places in our lives is rarely easy or painless. On the contrary, it often feels like passing through a refining fire. These lessons aren't meant to comfort you. They exist to break the parts of you that no longer serve God's plan. Think about this. Gold only becomes pure through intense heat. In the same way, you must go through moments of breaking to be molded into what God created you to be. Look at Joseph's story. He was the favored son, had grand dreams, and believed his life would be glorious. But before he could reach his destiny, he was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned. God could have spared him from all of that, but He didn't. Why? Because every one of those experiences was shaping Joseph. He had to be broken to be rebuilt with character, humility, and wisdom. And the same applies to you. The truth is, we often resist these lessons because they confront us. They confront our pride, our selfish desires, and our deepest fears. But there is no growth without confrontation. God isn't interested in leaving you comfortable. He is interested in transforming you. Every challenge you face is an opportunity to leave something behind and embrace something new. The question is, are you willing to let God break the parts of you that need to be broken? This breaking can come in many forms. It might be a disappointment, a failure, or even the loss of something you deeply valued. And most of the time, we fight against it. We try to hold on to what God is trying to take away because we believe we know what's best for us. But here's the truth. God never takes anything from you without the intention of giving you something better. It might not be what you expected, but it will be exactly what you need to become who He has called you to be. And sometimes, the breaking is internal. God begins to work on your heart, exposing wounds you'd rather ignore. He brings painful memories, hidden sins, and limiting beliefs to the surface. This can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Just as a surgeon must open a wound to heal it, God needs to expose your most vulnerable areas to bring healing and transformation. And it's through this process that you realize how much you need to depend on Him. Remember, God is not trying to destroy you. He's preparing you. He sees something in you that you cannot see. He knows the potential hidden behind your flaws and fears. That's why He allows you to go through these lessons. Every moment of difficulty, every time you're forced to confront your limitations, is an opportunity to grow. You are being shaped for something greater. A practical example of this can be found in your own experiences. Think of a time when you faced something that seemed insurmountable. Maybe it was a loss, a failure, or a rejection. At the time, you might have questioned why God allowed it. But now, looking back, can you see how that experience shaped you? Perhaps it made you stronger, more compassionate, or more reliant on God. That's what it means to be molded by Him. God also uses people to shape us. Sometimes, He places people in our lives who challenge us, irritate us, or make us question our choices. These relationships can be difficult, but they are tools in God's hands. He uses these interactions to reveal areas where you need to grow. And as you learn to deal with these people with grace and humility, you realize it's not just them who are changing, it's you. As you reflect on all this, think about what it truly means to be molded by God. It's not a quick or easy process. It's a work that requires patience, faith, and courage. But in the end, the result is something incredible. You become the person God created you to be. And as you submit to this process, you begin to understand that true transformation isn't about changing what you do, but about changing who you are. You've come this far, but the real question is, what will you do with all that you've learned? God hasn't brought you to this moment by accident. Every revelation, every lesson, was placed before you to transform you. Are you ready to let go of your excuses, confront your weaknesses, and allow God to illuminate the darkest areas of your life? Or will you continue carrying the burden of trying to control everything on your own? Think carefully. Do you really want to keep carrying burdens you don't have to? God is offering you something greater, something deeper. But it requires courage. Courage to trust, to surrender, to let Him mold you. When was the last time you took a step of faith, not knowing what was ahead? Maybe today is the day to take that step. God is calling you to a life of purpose, a life where you don't just survive but thrive. You don't have to do it alone. He is by your side, ready to guide you. But the decision is yours. What are you waiting for? Will you let this knowledge slip away, or will you use it to completely transform your life? Now is the time to act. Share your experience, apply the lessons, seek spiritual growth. Let God lead you. And as you reflect on all this, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join a community seeking to live with purpose and wisdom. Your journey starts now. Are you ready?